McGarry, and I'm a powerlifter for British weightlifting.
Before we get into it, how do you define mental health and why does it matter?
I think mental health matters in everyday life, but in particular in sport, is because, I mean, for me, myself, I've been going through like good times of training, and in my head I've been thinking that I'm not in a good part of training, and I'm not doing well. And when my boss or one of my coaches brings the data to me of my training and shows me that I'm getting stronger, my speeds are getting quicker, but in my head for weeks or for months I've been telling myself that I'm not worthy of certain things, I'm not good enough, I haven't got the ability to be able to do this. So I think it's massively important to keep, not only to keep that a good level of mental toughness, but also to be adaptable to different situations, like physically definitely, but also mentally, because I've definitely had challenges in the last a couple of years that have made me think and made me do things and have thought patterns that I didn't really recognise or I've never really entertained before. And I think the importance of mental health has been made clear to me since I've been seeing Shelley, my psychologist, for the last sort of 12 months, and I didn't really understand the subject of mental health before. It was just, I had a very much, and I still have today really, it's something I'm working on. I've always really had a get on with it attitude, but as I've reached the elite level of sport, that sort of goes out the window a bit, because you can't just keep getting on with things when you're not thinking straight, or more so for me is when your thoughts are going against the actual, against what's actually happening. I think a big thing for me is, I say, as we tell ourselves a lot of stories, and it's down to you which ones you believe in, and I think that's been a big thing for me that I've had to learn.
So you were able-bodied up until you were 20. What was life like leading up to your spinal cord injury?
Life was probably the best it's ever been in a year that was a close proximity to my injury. I finally found something where I belonged. Particularly, that was my first year of university. So it was. Growing up, I was always different. I always stood out. I never really fitted the norms. I didn't really suit the school structure. So I was always probably the kid that was getting in unnecessary trouble, getting up to no good. But I went to university. I've done it the long way because I didn't perhaps do as well as I should have done at school. But I've honestly felt somewhere that I belonged. I was enjoying it, and it was the best year of my life. I was playing rugby. I'd met some amazing people, and yeah, life was probably the best it had been for me. I mean, we sort of growing up, we didn't have tons of money or anything like that. We had to work for what we had, and that was it. And sometimes that led me down wrong paths. But yeah, life's always been all right. I've never gone without. My parents. I've always made sure I've had enough. We've got enough. We've got food on the table, and I guess that's what I was happy with, you know. And when I went to university, I saw a bit of a different world. I see people from all different sides, and at the start, I couldn't comprehend some of the stuff that the people that I was now interacting with. Like, I thought that only happened in like films and things like that. Like some of the lives they've had and the holidays they've had and the house party. It was just normal to me, and I was happy with that. But yeah, like it was a class time leading up to my spinal cord injury, and as I say, I was probably at my happiest point.
Did your spinal cord injury impact your mental health?
Ah, that's a good question. Because if you asked me this question, probably. So what are we now? We're coming up to 6 years injured now. If you asked me that question in the first 4 years, I would have probably said no. I probably, because as I said in earlier, I just got on with things. I just parked it and went on to the next thing. But in the recent couple of years, when I've got to the top end of sport, I've started to see Shelley, a psychologist that's linked with the English Institute of Sport, is just actually how much it did, and I didn't quite realise it, because addressed things, and I've never got closure on a lot of stuff. I've just sort of parked it and gone on to the next. Like, for an example, when I come out of hospital, I went straight back to university. Like, the day I left hospital, I didn't go home, I didn't go and see anyone. It was just straight out of hospital, straight out into my own digs at uni, and I just kept getting on to the next thing. And then it wasn't until the last couple of years where it sort of dawned on me that this is real life. This is like a forever thing. And obviously, the deeper you get into an injury, hope gets less and less of one day doing the unthinkable and being on your feet again. So yeah, as I would have said, probably no until like the sort of last 18 months or 2 years, where I've had a few sort of struggles with stuff in relation to the spinal cord injury, and I think the biggest thing for me is the sort of the defectiveness and the shame of it, because what my idea of what a man should be like, what the idea of a modern day man should be like, is very different to what I am now, and I'm just getting my head around that in terms of like being vulnerable, asking people for help. Like it drives me crazy in a sense, because my rooted core belief is men should be the person that's providing, the person that's doing things. So that's probably been in recent times the biggest adaptation that I'm having to get to learn. And it's even little things like, even though I know my friends or family are massive support, like you avoid certain conversations and things like that because I don't want the shame of that conversation. Or for example, if you try to get into a venue and someone, like for example, I've had times before where I've been told I don't suit the look of a place and things like that, and I have to go through a full process to digest that without losing my temper in a way, because that's how I probably would have done it a few years ago. So I think that's been the biggest thing for me, like the shame, the vulnerability, that side of it's the biggest thing for me. Like, and yeah, I'll probably say it has done. It has probably, I guess, affected my mental health. Not saying I'm depressed or whatever, or I've got mental health issues, but yeah, for sure there's challenges that I face on a day-to-day basis now that mentally I probably thought I would have never had to think about or go through. And I think it's the thinking that kills us in a sense, like, because I mean, certainly me, I'm quite catastrophic with my thoughts. So I'll think about something that's years down the line, and I'm thinking about it already, and I'm already thinking about, oh, I can't do that, or I can do it. But when I stop and think, I can do it, but it's just that's the biggest thing for me. I think I'm having to, now it's coming a bit more real life, and I'm getting to the age where real life things start taking their course. I think, yeah, it has for sure. But yeah, we're dealing with it. We're trying to deal with it anyway.
Following your spinal cord injury, how did you get into powerlifting?
So it was actually by complete chance, to be fair. I was always pretty keen to lift heavy weights in the gym from pretty young. But it was always usually to support my football, rugby, or whatever sport I was playing at the time. And we went to in the March of every year, there's a interspinal games at a place called Stoke Mandeville, which was the Paralympic hub once upon a time. And we went down there, and I'd done 4 sports during the week, and I won the 4 sports across the week. And I was just flying through the week, so I was obviously buzzing. And then and the person that was meant to be doing the powerlifting on the Friday had been in my ear all week saying he was stronger than me, better than me, whatever. So I sort of was like a bit gutted I weren't able to do it. But then on the Friday he pulled out, and so I was like, do you know what? I've done it before. I'll give it a crack, and I ended up benching. I think it was like 140 kilos, which was the first time I'd touched a bench in a couple of years. Because obviously. No, it wasn't a couple of years. I just told a complete lie. It was probably I hadn't touched a barbell in probably about a year, because I'd done the 6 months on the spinal unit, and then about 6 months after it was a spinal game. So ended up winning it, getting talent ID'd for British weightlifting. But the funny thing was, I actually ended up giving them the wrong details on the day. So apparently they'd been contacting me but couldn't get hold of me. And it wasn't until I bumped into Stuart Martin, who was working a little bit at my university at the time. And he was like, we've been trying to get hold of you. And I said, oh. And that it sort of grew from there. And I come up to Loughborough for a taster day. And I fell in love with the art of being able to be stronger than any person in the gym, no matter whether they were in a chair, whether they were 6 foot tall, whether they were 200 kilos in body weight. I just got a buzz of being the strongest dog about, and that's where it grew from, really. And I just think there's so many, especially in powerlifting, like there's so many incredible people lifting huge numbers, like, and to the average person, like you can't comprehend it, like, and I've just fell in love with it, and I think it's such an epic sport, and I think so I haven't really looked back from that day, really.
Over the last year, you have been managing multiple injuries. Talk us through how you manage the impact that they've had.
Yeah, so obviously went to the World Championships in November of 2021 out in Georgia, which was my first major international, and it couldn't have gone any better, to be fair. I got 3 out of 3 lifts, come 7th in the world. For my first international comp, I was buzzing. I was knocking on the door with the big boys, and everything was dandy. Set a new British record there, and I was sort of left that comp thinking, like, the world's my horizon. But what a lot of people I necessarily haven't told anyone, but all I'd done that week was cry my eyes out, because shortly before we went, I was told that I had quite a dangerous thing called a osteotoma in my ear, which is an inner ear, and it's basically, what I understand it as, this might not be scientifically to the point, but what I understand it as is like when dead skin cells react with each other, and it turns into a bit of a Pac-Man and just starts destroying everything around it. Now, that obviously pulled that performance out. It was testament to my 2 coaches, Tom and Ben, because that whole week they were like a pillar of strength, because I was almost at that point like, why me? Because I'd had this spinal injury, I'd got over it, and I was starting to do something again, and then this was another major thing to go wrong. Like, at the age of I was 23 then, and it was almost like I was told there's a higher chance I was going to lose my hearing. So that was a tough pill to swallow after overcoming what I'd overcome already, and it was one that I didn't really get, because when my spinal cord injury happened, it just happened. Like, I had to deal with it. There was no thinking about it. There was no, what am I going to do? Like, but this one, I had to wait for some major surgeries. There was a little bit of waiting involved, so I was thinking, and it was a lot harder to deal with, because I couldn't just brute force get on with it, you know. So then obviously I returned back from Georgia. I put all that to the back of my head and produced probably the best performance I've produced so far. Not that there's been many to write home about, but that was probably my best one to date. And I got home, and I'd actually had I had a fall in Georgia as well, but I thought nothing of it, just got back in my chair. Anyway, I got back home, and as I was waiting for my surgery, which we got home at the start of December, my surgery for my brain and ear was in January. But on the 28th of December, I went down to my dad's just for like our Christmas day with him, and my right leg started to swell up, and in the space of a couple of hours, it had gone literally to the size of about 3 legs, and it was like, I thought it was going to explode, where it was like so big and the skin was so tight. And then so my dad was like, "You've got to go to the hospital," like, and for a big lad as well, I didn't even eat my dinner, which was the saddest part of the whole story. And I shot off to hospital, and I'd actually completely snapped my femur whilst I was out in Georgia. And where I just got on with it and kept going, it actually twisted. So that meant that my bone had almost repairing backwards, because I got to a point where I was sending my mum and my best mate like photos of my leg, like when I'm on the bed and my toes were facing the bed. And I was like, "Do you reckon something's wrong here?" And like, sort of thing. And But in hindsight, I should have gone then. But yeah, and anyway, so with that, I had to have 3 surgeries in the space of 3 days on my femur. One to re-snap it, one to realign it, and one to put the rod in. Ended up having 3 major surgeries in the space of 3 days. And on the 4th day, while I was in the hospital, and I got a phone call from my ear specialist from Nottingham Hospital, and he sort of reanalyzed my situation, and the cholesteatoma was on the verge of breaking into my brain. So then I got rushed in to see him and had a further 2 surgeries about a week later. So as you can imagine, it was up against it. And then on top of that, just after I'd had the ear op, I then got told by my urologist that the operation I'd had a year previous had failed, and I'd needed more operations to reconstruct my bladder. So in a space of 3 months, I ended up having 15 surgeries on 3 different body parts, and this meant I was out of the sport for 5 months, about 5 months recovery. Most of them spent laying on the bed, and then the recovery was far from ideal. I ended up developing hematomas in the wounds and things like that. So I ended up not leaving my bed or touching a barbell from December all the way until the end of April, and it just knocked me for 6, because I had something to get back for, and I think that's what made it harder. I had something I cared about, I had something I wanted to succeed at, and all the time I was sat at home, I felt a bit like a waster, a bit of a waste of space, a failure in a sense. And this was, I think, when I first started to notice my mental side of things change, because I was struggling. I struggled in that time because I couldn't deal with everything going wrong at once. And when I was sat in my room, at one point I didn't leave my bed for 12 weeks. Like, I was on my bed solid for 12 weeks, because it was my left leg, my stomach, and then my right ear. So it was just like there was no way in which I was comfortable. And obviously, I then had, at the end of January, I had another operation on my ear, which they removed the whole ear, and it left me deaf in my right ear. So it was almost like I dealt with at the time I thought I dealt with a spinal cord injury, and then it was another thing. I've lost half of my hearing now. So it ended up being a pretty dark time, and I sort of started to believe the stories I was telling myself, even though they wasn't true. I started to feel like I wasn't worthy. I didn't deserve to be on a world-class program. I started to dislike my body, because it just kept letting me down. It kept failing on me, and that was quite a dark place to be in, especially for someone that I like to deal with things head on. I like to deal with things on my own a lot of the time. I don't, as I said earlier, I don't like to be vulnerable. I don't like to have that shame brought on me of asking people for help. So that probably was I'd say the darkest time of my life, and it's quite a strong statement, considering I had a spinal cord hit a couple of years previous, but it was, and the whole year ended up just being injured, coming back, injured back, and then I went to the Commonwealth Games and produced one of the, again, probably my second best performance of my career. Absolutely loved it. Was in front of hundreds of my own people, and it was honestly the most magical competition, and being in around the athlete village and everything was the best part of my life. And it was just, after I finished that, I then got told I'd need further surgeries on my ear and head, because they had to put artificial bones and implants into my head to protect the brain from any infections, because the cholesteatoma had eroded the bones that do that job, and then 2, to try and save or regain some hearing in that right ear. So I had them operations on the 8th of December in 2022, and then again that kept me out until the end of January, so that was another 2 months out. And I think that was the toughest one, because I just started to get some momentum going again, and obviously had the 8 weeks out, and the hearing didn't come back. The operation failed, the implants didn't work, so it was a bit like a kick in the teeth, like almost it was a bit pointless doing it. Even though my physio and my boss would tell you differently, and it's going to stop. Hopefully, things happening in the future. It was a tough time to say the least.
What about the last year was the most difficult, and how did you manage the impact?
I think the thing that was most difficult for me is I had a burning desire to get back to something. So in a sense that when I had my spinal cord injury, all I had to worry about was recovering from that. Whereas when I had all the operations and surgeries I had last year, I was worrying about my sport, and from the outside everyone sees elite sport as all sunshine and rainbows, but it's probably one of the most difficult careers you can be in, because there's always someone ready to replace you. There's always someone chomping at the bit. You've always got to be better than someone else, and your big competition, the big one, the one that everyone wants to go to, only happens every 4 years. So in my head, I'm like, if I'm not making Paris, I've got to wait another 4 years for that chance, and who knows what's going to happen in 4 years, right? So, and it was the constant. Every operation I'd had before that, I'd had the operation, had the recovery, and then it was good. But in that particular day, I'd had the operation, and then in the recovery, things kept going wrong. So I ended up having my Team GB Dr. Kate on speed dial, and I think without her, I would have been absolutely in a world of trouble, because some nights I'd be in A&E like 2 a.m. or whatever, and then I'd ring her, I'd be like, do I need to be here? And she'd be answering the phone at all times of the hours. She was incredible. Katie was incredible, my physio. And then people were a pillar of strength, but that was the thing that I struggled. It was the shame of it. It was just like, I'm new here, this shouldn't be happening. Like, I should be flying at this point. This is the honeymoon period of sport. When you first start, you start flying. And for me, it was a complete opposite. That was like the most challenging part. And my body just kept failing and failing and failing. And I remember sitting there, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with crying, but I've never really been a crier. But I remember sitting there one day and just unloading to my boss, and it must have shocked him as much as it shocked me, because I didn't feel it coming, but it just come out, and I just sat there and I just cried, and I couldn't fathom why so much was going wrong to me. And I know that in hindsight now, that was the wrong way to look at it. It was like, everything happens for a reason, right? But I just couldn't fathom why I couldn't catch a break, you know. And that was the most challenging thing. And in the early days, I didn't deal with it. I got sad. I was getting angry, and it wasn't until I started seeing a psychologist called Shelley, and she's like, a lot of my issues, demons, whatever you want to call them, in that period, I think were just unmasked ones from my spinal cord injury that I hadn't addressed, and mix that burning desire to get back and to be successful. Because I think the biggest thing when I first started the sport, there was a little bit of a buzz around my name. People, like, we hadn't really seen a super heavy in this country lifting the weights that I was lifting and making the progress I was making. And then when all this happened, it was like my whole career just was put on hold. And I'd always been pretty strong, and I'd always been pretty sort of mentally tough, but I was starting to tell myself stories and I was believing them. And even though they couldn't be further from the truth, my boss man would be pulling his hair out saying, like, where's the data that proves this? But I'll just be clocking over every day, telling myself I'm not worthy, I don't deserve to be where I am, I haven't worked hard for it, I've got here by fluke, and that couldn't have been further from the truth. And I was someone that, even after my spinal cord injury, every single day over the last especially over the last couple of years, I've stared adversity in the face, and I've never given up, I've never quit, and I've never thought about quitting. But in that particular time, it was the first time where I was like questioning whether I even deserved the air I breathe, you know. And it was dark. I remember saying to my mum, like, I don't deserve to be here. Like, what's the point in me being here? And thoughts never materialised, but they started to creep in. Like, I wasn't worthy of the air I breathe, and I'm sort of got my mum like sort of half breaking down in front of me as well. But I generally thought that at that point, because I had nowhere to go, you know. I was like, no matter how much I want to do something and how much my brain wants to do it, and my body don't want to do it, my body don't want to back me on anything. And I just think the best thing I did to deal with it was, I'm still not great at it. I'm still not brilliant at it, but I became a little bit more comfortable with vulnerability. And I remember when I started talking to Shelley, it was like the first 5 or 6 sessions, I just cried, you know, and I got no shame in admitting that now, where a few years ago I'd have probably been like, nah, big tough guy, I don't cry. But you know what, there was no shame in that, and it was a challenging thing. And what she made me aware of is that I was going through things that most people couldn't comprehend. So why was I bothered about what people thought of me? Why was I bothered about the way people perceived me, if I was crying, if I was upset, if I was down? Because they don't even know what I'm going through, and most people will never even have to comprehend that. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. That was like, I know it's cliche to say, but talking about it and whatnot, it wasn't necessarily the talking about it, it was just the unloading of the emotion, the thoughts, like letting someone know what's going on in here. Because, you know, when you don't understand your own thoughts, it can be quite a scary place to be in, because I was thinking these things, but I didn't know why I was thinking them. And when you get into that spiral, and when I was on my own for a lot of the recovery, it was just, they were getting worse and worse every day, you know what I mean? And it was just like, yeah, and yeah, I think that was the biggest sort of lesson for me, and that is just, like, it's all right to be vulnerable, it's all right to, it's not shameful as a man to have a little tear up. It's not shameful as a man to show a bit of emotion other than anger or whatever, the manly emotions in a sense, you know, it was all right. So yeah, I think that was the biggest sort of coping mechanism in that time.
What was different between the last year of injuries and your initial spinal cord injury?
I think the biggest thing for me is it comes back to the whole defectiveness shame that pops up quite a lot with me in terms of the way I view things. Like, as someone else will view something as not that big a deal, but I won't even approach the situation or question the situation because I'm ashamed of what people might think of me because of that, if that makes sense. And I think that was a similar, when I had the spinal cord injury, I was just Liam McGarry. I was the bubbly big guy that went university, like, some people loved, some people hated, and I was just me. I was unapologetically me, and I was in hospital, but I'd built such strong relationships with people at university that I was never really alone when I was in with my spinal cord. And it's something that I come back to earlier when I said, when I had my spinal cord injury, all I had to deal with at that point in time was my spinal cord injury. And I think the thing that was most difficult, and what made this a lot harder than the spinal cord injury for me, which it might sound crazy, but is the fact people recognise me for something. I had, and it's a thing that's popped up in the last couple of years, that I've maybe placed so much importance of my sport that I've forgotten about the rest of my life. Yeah. Like, I've forgotten to build a face, for example, in other aspects, and I've given so much to this, and to put myself into the position I was, and I was buzzing off that performance of Worlds, and I'm sitting there looking like, I'm going to take over the world. Like, I genuinely believe that, and I still do. I still do think I got the ability to do that. But I remember sitting there with, like, my friends, family, and going, like, I'm gonna take over this game, like, because that's generally how I felt about it at that time. I was flying, and then I had the injury, and I had all these surgeries and whatnot, and it was like my career just got put on hold. And as I said, I felt like there was a little bit of a buzz around my name when I was in that first 18 months in the sport. No one from Britain had really seen or definitely in the powerlifting sense, seen a guy benching what I was benching, and it was almost like, Jesus, this is like scary exciting. And it was like, my career got put on hold. And I think the hardest thing about it all is the world around me didn't stop. Yeah. So what I struggled with most is seeing my competitors improve, seeing the people I'm going against getting better and better, watching them in competitions, watching my teammates getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and I'm sitting there going, I'm useless because I'm not doing nothing, even though it's through no fault of my own. But I remember laying there some days and I'm watching competitions and I'm thinking, like, I'm never going to reach that anymore. you know what I mean? And that was the biggest thing for me. Like, that's where I don't think mentally it was just tough with a spinal cord injury, because I didn't have that side of things. I wasn't thinking about getting back to something. I wasn't fighting against other people or worrying about what other people was doing. I was just worrying about me, myself and I, and getting better, and at that point getting back on my feet, right? That was the only thing I was worrying about. But this time I was looking at other competitors, I was looking at teammates, and I'm like, Jesus, all these people around me are getting strong, they're making developments. I'm even looking at people in other sports doing mad things, and I'm like, I want a bit of that, do you know what I mean? But my body wasn't allowing me to have that. So I think that's what made this period so much, like, and I've had people, when I tell people this, they're like, nah, surely not, mate, surely not. But I can't tell you the battle I had to have with myself every day to not succumb to my thoughts, because you do get into that lonely place of feeling useless, feeling you're wasting people's time, you're sort of wasting fresh air. And even the people whose time you think you're wasting are telling you you're not. It was like, I couldn't get out of my own head, you know, and it's that killer thing of comparing yourself to others, right? What the beauty of social media sort of enhances in everyone. We're always comparing ourselves, we're always looking at someone else and thinking, why am I not like them? And when you're going through something like that, you actually believe that. You believe that what you're seeing is real life, and them people you're watching don't struggle as well. And I think that was definitely the hardest thing, because I just didn't, at that time, I didn't have the tools to deal with that, because, as I said, growing up and whatnot, mental health, I'd never even heard of the word, do you know what I mean? I'd never even heard of it. It was never a thing. We just got on with it. That's how we grew up. Like, didn't grow up with much, and we just got on with everything. Like, we was happy with what we had, do you know what I mean? So it wasn't until I had that overlining sort of pressure of the sport and what comes with the pressures of sport that I actually was like, Jesus, like, this is real life, this is serious stuff, you know? Like, thinking is the devil, like, it is. And yeah, and that's definitely why I think I struggled this time more than I did the first time round.
Have you spoke about your experiences, and did this change anything? Because I want to add something to that. From social media and things, you don't post much about your other injuries and things. Like, you'll sometimes post, oh, I'm back on the recovery game or whatever, but you're not too vocal. So do you have someone that you speak to about that, and does it help?
Now you're going to get a very honest answer, I mean, now, but you know, with social media, like, I have a battle with, like, everyone sees, like, my psychologist is the only person I've ever told this, so this is a big honest thing. But so now every time I put a post up, I have a battle with myself in my head, and I delete it. Like, if you go through every time, I've deleted so many posts, because, like, I just don't feel what I'm saying is worthy. Like, I feel like I just feel like, because, do you know what, I'll be honest.
Like, people won't understand, or they'll take it the wrong way, or?
I don't even think it's that, but you know what, I don't like me, you know, and I think that's a brutal honesty of it. Like, I don't like me, I don't like my situation, I don't like being in this chair, and I don't like the way I look in this chair. So I upload things, and it's almost being too vulnerable. You know, it's opening up to criticism, and I can take criticism. I'm thick-skinned. That don't bother me, but it's opening up to a world, and it's like, I don't want people to think like, if I upload about this, it's like, oh, I can't do this, and I don't want them to make their own mind up about things. So I just don't bother posting it, and that's a big thing that I've identified with my psychologist, is that all my social media is just sport, and I've got such an incredible story, and I love talking about it. But you know, when I put it down on social media, I just feel like I'm rambling sometimes, or people ain't interested, or people are not bothered. And if you go into my video editing app, I've probably got about 40-50 videos that are spinal injury related, and things like that. But they just never leave. They never leave the app, because it's just, I have such a battle in my own brain, and the old Liam, the Liam that's feels like men should be a certain way always wins. You know, it always takes over that ability to be vulnerable and the ability to show people that the other side of me, and I feel like, yeah, it'll almost dent my masculinity in some ways, and then I look through Instagram and often the people that are talking about this or are talking about their struggles in related to spinal cord injury or disability or whatever it is are usually female, so I feel like I don't really deserve in that space. I don't really belong in that space, even though I know I can add value to that space, and if I was to do it, I could probably do it better. It's that vulnerability, it's that it eats away at me a lot, and I think I wasn't really expecting to talk about this today, but yeah, it's like people see me as this big, macho, tough Liam McGarry, like, which I once was, but I still am. I'm still tough. I'm still who I have been. But you know what? I got a lot of, what's the right word? I got a lot of demons. You know, I got a lot of things I don't like. I got a lot of things I'll never accept, and I think a lot of people, and I also don't want to, like, I think a lot of this influencer-based stuff, a lot of it's a lie. Because I read some of this and I think there's no way you actually think like that. But and they might well do think like it, and they might do, but in my head there's no way, because I can't accept these things, you know what I mean? Because if I'm brutally honest, although I've got a cracking career and I love my career and I love what I've done after my injury, I'd give anything to go back to having my legs back, being normal, and I've even gone as far to say, like, if you give me a 20-year prison sentence and I become out fully normal after it, I'd do it. Do you know what I mean? Because, like, this is a life sentence, and I think it's one of them things that is only dawning on me in recent months, like, because I feel like over the years my spinal related stuff has fell off a little bit, because it's become a lot more real life, and the more real life it becomes, the more, in a way, that more hatred I get towards it, you know, and it is a dark place to be sometimes, but and you know, it's you can't talk to many people about it because they don't get it. Like, I love my family, friends to death, but when you talk about, you'll be alright, mate, come on, just get on with it, you're strong, you're tough, but I don't hear that all the time. Like, it's so cliche, and if I could swear I'd use a word for it right now, but it is a load of rubbish, you know what I mean? And so often I just think, you know what, let me just keep it to myself, and it's almost like, without even knowing it, like, a lot of the answers you get are patronising, and you're just like, as soon as someone you're talking about open their mouth, you know they don't get it, you know. So it was almost like, it was that, again, coming back to that defectiveness shame, that's really what stopped me from continuing the whole social media thing, because I'm ashamed, I guess. I'm ashamed of a lot of things in my life, even though I know I'm doing amazing things and I'm turning up every day, I'm never quitting, and I'll never quit, but do you know what, sometimes you think, like, it would be far easier to quit, you know, and it is that shame thing, and it's something I'm working on. Hopefully this is the launch pad that I get back on the whole recovery road, because I know it's definitely something my psychologist is passionate for me to do, because, like, when I speak her through things, she's like got a tear in her eyes. She's like, why don't you tell this story? Why don't you tell this story? But it's like, yeah, I guess it just comes back to that whole being ashamed, and I'll try and defect away from the wheelchair and from my surroundings as much as possible. And I think when I post about it and things like that, it brings limelight to it. So yeah, I guess it is that whole underlying thing of that defectiveness shame that drives my lack of social media presence in the power world, or the disabled world. I guess it's just me lifting weights, and that's about it, you know. But that's something I'm proud of. That's something I love to identify myself with. So I guess that's the easiest thing to do, you know. It's like, I don't have to have a mental battle when I do that. So yeah, that's my honest answer to that question, Alicia.
Is there any advice you have for others who might be struggling with mental health?
I think physically do things that your brain's telling you not to. So I think what I mean by that is is when your brain don't want to do nothing that day and you want to lay in bed, you want to lay in a dark room, you don't want to see no one, you don't want to talk to someone. Get outside, get some sunshine, in whatever capacity that is, whether you're going through a spinal cord injury and you're newly injured, get hoisted into a chair and get out the front of the hospital. That was a massive thing for me, and I think that was something every time my nan came and visited, that's something we always done. We used to get across and we used to go and sit outside all day because fresh air, the sun, and just do the opposite to what your brain's telling you to do. So if your team's telling you to go to bed and lock yourself away, get out. If your brain's telling you don't just lay in bed all day, get up, get out of our shower, do you know what I mean? Just, if it's telling you to sit down, don't do nothing, go to the gym, go do something, do things, and do the complete opposite to what your brain's telling you, because that's when you'll learn a lot about yourself. And I think often thoughts just take over, and if you let them take over, then you lose control of your own mind. And I think secondly, a big thing for me is never lose hope. I mean, I've had conversations with you about it, but I think life without hope is not a life worth living. And I think there's always hope. I don't think there's ever anything that's bad enough where the only way out is to commit suicide or to take your life or whatever. I know that's in extreme circumstances, but it's happened more and more often, so I think it's quite relevant. And I think no matter how dark you think your room is, no matter how bad you think your life is or how bad a person you are, just always look for that glimmers of hope. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, because when I first had my injuries, I'm not going to beat around the bush. My dad and parents didn't leave the hospital for weeks, because I was like, as soon as you leave this hospital, that wire's going around my neck, sort of thing. And I got no shame in admitting that, but I quickly learnt that just find hope. There's always hope. There's hope of something. If there's no hope you can walk again, there's hope that you'll be able to train again. If you can't, there's always something you can do, and I think is finding that hope. And I think the third piece of advice, which is arguably, I'm going to say this in a PG way because my actual quote for this has got a few choice words in it, but is don't believe the degrading, disempowering stories that your brain tells itself all the time. Because I think especially in the last 18 months when I was going through all my surgeries and hospital stays, I started to believe what I thought. And often it's quite far from your reality, and I think if you live a nightmare in your head, it will start to creep into your reality. And I think everyone's got the power to be the author of their own story, and if you need to write your story, don't let your brain write it. So go on real life stuff. My boss, in a sport context, likes to say the data doesn't suggest that. Does real life back up the thoughts you're thinking? Often it doesn't. They're just thoughts you got in your head that you've made because, or from my perspective, because I'm not feeling good about myself, or because I'm going through something, or because I can't deal with things the way I want to deal with things, or whatever it might be. I'll start telling myself things, and I never had this until the last 18 months, but I start to believe it. But then when I actually sit there and I look at things, it couldn't be further from the truth. It couldn't be further from reality, and it's just, don't lose hope. Don't believe the stories that your brains tell you, and I think you'll be onto a winner.